I cannot be silent.
Back when Eisenhower was the president, golf courses is where most of his time was spent. So I never really listened to what the president said, because in general I believed that the general was politically dead. But he always seemed to know when the muscles were about to be flexed, because I remember him saying something, mumbling something about a military-industrial complex.
As I have walked among the desperate, rejected, and angry young men, I have told them that Molotov cocktails and rifles would not solve their problems. I have tried to offer them my deepest compassion while maintaining my conviction that social change comes most meaningfully through nonviolent action. But they ask, and rightly so, what about Vietnam? They ask if our home nation wasn't using massive doses of violence to solve its problem, to bring about the changes it wanted. Their questions hit home, and I knew that I could never again raise my voice against the violence of the oppressed in the ghettos without having first spoken clearly to the greatest purveyor of violence in the world today, my own government. For the sake of those boys, for the sake of this government, for the sake of the hundreds of thousands trembling under our violence, I cannot be silent.
Each one reach one, each one time.
I cannot be silent.
Nobody can do everything, but everybody can do something. Everyone must play a part. Everyone's got to go to work. Work for peace. Spirit say work.
I cannot be silent.
Empowering the body, mind, and spirit. This is We Cannot Be Silent with Phil Restino and Larry Pinckney.
Well, hello everybody, and welcome to the February 17th, 2014 edition of We Cannot Be Silent with Phil Restino and Larry Pinckney. Once again, we're broadcasting live on the Wolf Spirit Radio Network, and that's wolfspiritradio.com. Larry, tonight we have a very special guest who's been involved in some things that really needs to be talked about, and that is Alison Weir, founder of If Americans Knew, and the website there is ifamericansknew.org, and she is also the current president of the Council for the National Interest. And that has a website itself, and that's councilforthenationalinterest.org. And Ms. Weir is also an organizer of the upcoming National Summit to reassess the U.S.-Israel, quote, special relationship, which will be held at the National Press Club in Washington, D.C. on Friday, March 7th, 2014, from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. And there's a website for it, the summit coming up, and that is natsummit.org, natsummit.org, and you can find out about what that's going to involve by going to that website. At this point in time, I'd like to read the introduction for Ms. Weir. Alison Weir is president of the Council for the National Interest, created by ambassadors and former congressmen in 1989, and executive director of If Americans Knew, a nonprofit organization she founded following an independent investigation as a freelance journalist to the West Bank and Gaza in early 2001. She writes and speaks widely on Israel-Palestine and is considered the foremost analyst on media coverage of the region. Her book on the history of U.S.-Israel relations will be published in February. Her articles have appeared in Censored 2005, the Encyclopedia of Palestine, Israel, the Washington Report on Middle East Affairs, Counterpunch, Editor and Publisher, The Link, and other books and publications. She has spoken in England, Wales, Qatar, Baghdad, Ramallah, Asia Media Summits in Kuala Lumpur and Beijing, on Capitol Hill, and at numerous American universities, including Harvard, Yale, Stanford, Berkeley, Georgetown, the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy, and the Naval Postgraduate Institute. In 2004, she was inducted into honorary membership of Phi Alpha Literary Society at Illinois College. The award cited her as a courageous journalist lecturer on behalf of human rights. She is the first woman in history to receive an honorary membership in Phi Alpha. The New York Times reported of her presentation. When the speech ended, Miss Weir was met with thunderous applause, and across the room there was a widespread sense of satisfaction that someone was saying what needed to be said. And former U.S. Senator Tom Campbell stated, Miss Weir presents a powerful, well-documented view of the Middle East today. She is intelligent, careful, and critical. American policymakers would benefit greatly from hearing her first-hand observations and attempting to answer the questions she poses. Wow, that's quite a bit there, and we are really excited to have Miss Weir on our program tonight. And before we get to bringing Miss Weir on, I want to make sure that we have our co-host on, Larry Pinckney of the Black Activist Writers Guild and IntrepidReport.com. That's blackactivistwg.org and IntrepidReport.com. Larry, are you with us?
Yes, indeed. And I'm anxiously looking forward to our guest. Alison, thank you for joining us. What can I say? That's about it. Let's move on to Alison.
Oh, very good. Okay, so I'm here, Larry's here, and let's bring Alison Weir on air. Alison, are you with us?
I am. Thank you so much for inviting me to be on your show.
Oh, thank you, and welcome to the program. We're wondering if I just read off all that introduction about you, but what could you tell us right from your own self as far as your background, how you got started, and up to what you're doing these days with If Americans Knew and Council for the National Interest and the summit coming up?
Sure, I'd be glad to. I guess I'll start with my background. I really was very much like most Americans about 13 years ago. I knew very little about Israel-Palestine. I think like most Americans, I really did not think it had anything to do with me. I was, of course, very sympathetic to Israel. I had seen Exodus, the movie, and were very aware of the Nazi atrocities. I didn't really know much about what this conflict was about. At that time, I was the editor of a very small little weekly newspaper in Northern California that just wrote about the, local news. But then in fall of 2000, in the news for a while was the what's called the Second Intifada, the sort of major Palestinian uprising against the Israeli occupation and oppression. So that was in the news for a while, and I finally decided to just pay attention and try to, follow the news and learn what this conflict or this issue was all about. And when I finally did that as a journalist, when I finally paid attention, I noticed how one-sided the coverage was. We heard so much, as we still do, from and about Israelis. And then I expected also to hear from and about Palestinians, but that came much less often. And I got more curious. At that time, people were just starting to use the internet for research, and that was what I started to do. And you can get really almost real-time reports from the region itself. You don't have to rely on the U.S. media, fortunately. And so I started to discover that, learn what was going on, and how it was not being covered fully and honestly in the American media. So after a few months of getting more and more curious and involved in learning about this, I finally decided to quit my job and to go over there by myself as a freelance reporter and just travel around Gaza and the West Bank as an independent journalist to see what was going on. So that's how I got started.
And what you saw was a little bit different than what we were seeing here in the States on television. That's right. Safe to say.
That's right. I saw, I saw entire residential neighborhoods already. This was in February and March of 2001, that were just in ruins. They looked to me like those pictures we've seen of World War II. And, in Gaza, I remember one neighborhood, the, homes were in ruins, the ones that were standing. Most were still standing, but they're not anymore. But back then they were still standing, but they're bullet riddled and, huge holes through the walls and through the roofs. And, I saw children in hospitals that had been shot by Israeli forces. I remember seeing a little boy who was brain dead from having been shot by invading Israeli forces. A lot of Americans, the way the media coverage is, it often makes it appear that Israel is being attacked by Palestinians. But it's really the opposite. Palestinians are in their neighborhoods, in their homes, and Israeli forces every week come in and oppress them, to use a sort of empty word for what goes on. At that time, they were coming in armored vehicles. Well, they still do, but then they were also using tanks, machine guns. They were shelling from Apache helicopters, into a population that's largely unarmed. It's largely a civilian population. There are resistance fighters now who are, have various weaponry. And they were just being attacked by what analysts say is the fourth or the fifth most powerful military on the planet. It's definitely in the top 10. Attacking one of the poorest populations on the planet, a population that has no army, has no air force, has no navy, has some guys trying to be resistance fighters. They have no body armor. They have no tanks. They have no planes. They have mostly rifles, some machine guns. It's so incredibly one-sided, and they are fighting on their own land almost all of the time, whereas Israeli forces are coming and invading that land in fact, all the time.
And this has been going on for 60 years, pretty much, has it not? Yeah. And you got the name of the organization you founded, If Americans Knew. And can you, I take it, that if we only knew, and that's the thing Larry and I have spoken about before, as far as being misled by the media, the corporate-owned media. There's a lot of ignorance, and there's willful ignorance, and there's just simple ignorance, plain old just not knowing something yet. Go ahead.
I think it's mostly that. Certainly, of course, it's not fun to know sad news, and it's not fun to know terrible news, really. But I do find that most people are not making the choice not to know it. There are many people that actually I just talked to a person a few days ago, who, he's busy, he has 2 little boys and he's trying to earn a living, but he listens to the news, he tries to be informed on issues, and, so there's somebody trying to know what's going on, trying to listen to the international news, etc., and doesn't know what's going on because it is so Israeli-centric that you don't get the full picture ever. The thing that was interesting in my conversation with him was that he seemed to be aware that he was not getting the full picture. And when he learned that I work on this particular issue on Israel-Palestine, he was very interested in hearing more about it to understand what was going on, and very receptive to the full story that he had not gotten before. So the good news is that I often find that people are curious about it. When I sit next to somebody on an airplane and they ask, if you might chat, and, you ask, are you traveling for family or work? And I say for work, and it comes out that it's something to do with Israel-Palestine, to give a speech or something. Almost all of the people are right away say, oh, that's interesting. What is that all about? So I think the potential interest is there. I think when people, and I named the organization If Americans Knew, because I didn't name it if liberals knew, if radicals knew, if conservatives knew, if Jews knew, if Christians knew. I just felt if all people knew what was going on there, if people had seen what I've seen and know that we are paying for it, I have no doubt that the large majority of our population would put an end to it because we're funding it. And it's not the way that anyone would want to see their money used. But people have no idea.
And looking at the flyer that you have for the National Summit to reassess the U.S.-Israel special relationship coming up on Friday, March 7th at the National Press Club in Washington, D.C., it states here that Israel is often considered a key ally for the United States. More U.S. tax money has been given to Israel than to any other nation. Currently over $8 million per day. The U.S. provides Israel trading advantages, loan guarantees, weaponry, technology, and other perks. At the same time, the U.S. has a long record of vetoing Security Council resolutions regarding Israel. And that's something I don't think people know. Right there, just the fact that we're giving $8 million a day of our tax money to this foreign nation. I didn't know about the USS Liberty, Allison, the attack on it, the June 8, 1967 attack on the USS Liberty, until somebody handed me a DVD in 2006. It was called Terror Storm, and it dealt with various false flag attacks in the past. And that was the first I had ever heard of the USS Liberty, an American ship, having been attacked by Israeli military, and they're still awaiting justice close to 50 years later. But this just goes to show you that there's so much we don't know, and if we knew, we could do something about it and start to make change. And the thing about these DVDs and the internet, you mentioned that at the time when you were founding, If Americans Knew, people were using the internet just then to do a little research and all. It hasn't developed to what it is today. But the best way to if you're unhappy with the media and being misled by this media, the answer is to become the media ourselves. And I think that what you've done and these folks making the DVDs and creating websites and these alternative radio networks, this is all part of the answer.
I completely agree. I think that That is another, there's a lot of bad news in what I'm working on and what you're working on every day. Mm. But there are positive things too. And one of the very positive things is the number of people of really, really very diverse backgrounds are sort of stepping forward and doing things they've never done before because, like me, I had never given a speech before. I'd certainly never been a foreign correspondent before. And, there are people around the country who, like you, are putting on radio shows and public TV shows. There are people that are putting on events in their local library or their local church, or maybe bringing speakers to the Rotary Club. And, that's what's necessary for all of us that have not paid attention before to a lot of issues. I'd like to focus on this one because this is, I think the Israeli-Palestinian one is central to so many other things, and it's been going on for so many decades that I think it's especially important to focus on this particular one, but just in general, to work on things that are wrong, that we see are wrong, and instead of waiting around for somebody else to do it or just complaining, well, they do this or the government does that, instead of just sitting around and seeing it and maybe complaining to each other, people are out there taking actions to try to do something about it. And I think that's growing, and that's really my only hope, is that it will be this kind of grassroots, nonviolent, but very powerful uprising by people around the country from all different backgrounds deciding to take charge again. This is our country. This is our tax money. Many of us have children and grandchildren that we want to leave a good country to. We care about other people around the world. And therefore, we need to do something. And many people are doing that.
Yes. Well, that's how Larry and I got the name of our program, We Cannot Be Silent. We took the name from the Beyond Vietnam speech that Dr. Martin Luther King gave 4 April 1967, a year to the day before he was murdered. And it's basically, when you're a witness to a crime, whether you want to be or not, these are my own words here, you're responsible. We're responsible. And to remain silent, I think that was part of the Dr. King's speech, to remain silent is to be, I'm using my own words, basically part of the crime yourself if you remain silent. Larry, would you like to jump in here, Larry, and add to this conversation a little bit on the responsibility, let's say, for once you become aware of these things, you got to do something about it.
Well, first of all, thank you, Phil. Thank you, Allison. I want to congratulate you, Allison, for the outstanding job that you've done over the past decade, and what you're continuing to do. I know it's not easy. Believe me, I do know. And I think that all of us need to also, by the way, I want to thank Dave Corso, our producer and hard-working man who has made it possible for this show to be on air. Anyway, let me get back to the topic. I think that it's important to understand that as far as Israel and the Palestinians are concerned, that what we as quote-unquote Americans are dealing with is censorship. ABC, NBC, CBS, PBS, that's right, I did say PBS, Fox News, all of them are basically censoring any real news with respect to, in fact, I don't call it news, I call it non-news, because it's really one-sided propaganda in favor of the Israeli Zionists. And having been to Palestine myself many years ago, and seeing firsthand the atrocities that were going on then, and that was decades ago, and it's even worsened now, I'm very cognizant of how important it is for us to break through this censorship. The American-Israeli, let me just put it this way, AIPAC, as it's known, which is, I call it the American-Israeli Mafia, really controls virtually all of our so-called leaders in Congress, right up to the White House, and that includes Barack Obama and Joe Biden, who basically are very pro-Zionist. Nothing has changed, whether it's Democrat or Republican. But as you said, Allison, this affects all of us. I don't give a damn whether people want to consider themselves Democrat or Republican. It's really time for us to put the R's and D's aside and consider ourselves as human beings on Mother Earth, on the planet, and deal honestly with the horrors that are going on, and to do everything that we can. Something else, Allison, that you said that I really appreciated was that, you pointed out that the Israeli-Palestinian situation that has been going on for so many decades. You pointed out that this affects many, many other issues. In fact, I agree. It does affect me. In fact, I would go perhaps a bit further and say it's really pivotal to most issues around the world with respect to U.S. Military involvement, whether that military involvement be direct or whether it be indirect. You mentioned the Apache helicopters. I want to point out that they're U.S.-made Apache helicopters. When I was in Palestine, I saw U.S.-made Phantom jets. Now, that Phantom jets go back a few decades, with the Star of David on their tails, meaning on the tail section of the plane, strafing and bombing women, men, and children. Of course, now we have F-16s, F-18s, et cetera, who are doing precisely the same thing. But the point is that if Americans knew, well, my dear sister, I hope you're correct. If Americans knew, we would do something about it. I want to believe that many of us are. In fact, I do know for a fact that more and more people are waking up, and as you pointed out, they're having meetings in libraries and in schools, in their neighborhoods, all over the place. And it does have to be, as you said, Allison, it does have to be grassroots. What I'd like to ask you, and then I'll talk a bit, if I may, about the USS Liberty, because I did interview a survivor of the USS Liberty, the Israeli attack. It was both an air attack and a naval attack on that U.S. ship. But I'll get back to that later. Allison, what I want to ask you is to give our audience, if you will, some examples of, let's be positive about this, of what people are doing around the country. You mentioned that, I think you mentioned that you were in Northern California working for a small newspaper, as you put it, or I think you said newspaper. But anyway, yeah. Well, I'm a veteran of the Black Panther Party, founded, as you know, in Oakland, California. In fact, I actually consider my roots to be in Northern California, though I've certainly lived around the country. So I'm very familiar with Northern California, from Sonoma to Berkeley to Oakland to San Francisco, et cetera, et cetera. So could you tell our audience, or would you tell our audience, Allison, some of the things that are happening throughout the country, and some of the things that you specifically, I should say, that you are doing to make sure that Americans do know what's going on?
Sure, I'd be glad to. There are, I'm trying to think where to start. Well, I'll start with other people and then maybe get to me. I mean, it just, actually next month, I guess March 1st, I believe it is, I'm going to be speaking at a Great Decisions group in a small college in Maryland. You know, a person went on the internet and discovered that the website If Americans Knew and contacted us to have a speaker. So that's somebody stepping out there. There are these groups around the country. And instead of going to someone that would give them the establishment line, they reached out to our organization that is, as you've seen, anybody that looks at our website, we're very fact-based. And I think it's very appropriate that she came to us, but I'm very pleased that that's what that person did. The same day, I'm actually have to do that. I'm going to do a talk to a group in Montana. This is a little grassroots group in Montana that's putting on events about Israel-Palestine at the same time. In fact, about a year ago, I did a speaking tour throughout Montana. More cities than I knew Montana had. And each place, there'd be a few, this little handful of people, ranging in age, from students up to people older than I am, which means pretty old, and, putting on an event right in their town. Throughout Montana. Then I guess it was a few months ago I did the same kind of thing in South Dakota. There it was interesting in a number of, I did the same kind of thing in Alaska. There's this little group in Alaska that was called, I think they're still active, Alaskans for Palestine. They were so excited to have somebody come because most people don't go to Alaska that it was wonderful. When I arrived at the airport, the whole committee came, took 2 cars to come to pick me up, even though I think I arrived at about midnight or something. So there are these different groups around the country that really are very exciting because they're, very often they're not people that otherwise would necessarily even know each other well. How many people have, other than your grandparents or your, grandchildren, it's not common for a 20-year-old and a 70-year-old to be hanging out together. But that, there are many groups that includes that kind of age range that are putting on these events. As far as what I'm doing personally and with If Americans Knew and also with the Council for the National Interest, we're doing so many projects that, we're sort of doing everything we can think of to try to get this information out to the public. So we have the If Americans Knew website that I think is very strong that we created about over 10 years ago. We now are actually just about to announce the new Council for the National Interest website that I'm also very excited about that, took a huge amount of effort to put together. That's now live and will be publicly announced tomorrow. We're putting up billboards around the country from Atlanta to Colorado to Texas. The billboards, most of them say, they have different slogans, but most of them say something like, $8 million per day to Israel just does not make sense. At Christmas time, we had some up mostly around Atlanta that were a picture of sort of a painting, I guess, an illustration of Bethlehem today, looking like the ancient Bethlehem, but now with a big wall around it, and with Mary and Joseph trying to go to Bethlehem, but of course they can't get through because there's a wall around it. It's an image created by the artist named Banksy. Very strong image. So we have those billboards. Anybody that can donate or come up with the money, we, as much as possible, put that into a billboard. And on the billboard, we give both the as much information as you can get on a billboard, which is, 10 words or less in terms of a slogan. But we also put our website with the hope, and this does happen, that many people will then go to the website and, of course, learn much, much more than you can get just from one little sort of soundbite. Then my most recent project that I'm very excited about and should be working on tonight, I have to proofread this, is a book. My first book, I did have a children's book that I published about 20 years ago, but my first book my first nonfiction book, is about the history of U.S.-Israel relations, going back 100 years. It is actually sort of I've tried not to make it too long. I've tried to keep it just the basic important facts that we should all know. But it's all well cited. I have over 200 footnotes, so everybody can see exactly where the information comes from. And some of it is really very explosive. In the course of doing this research, I stumbled across some facts that no one I've talked to has known about before, in terms of some of our Supreme Court justices, what kinds of things they were doing, some of the things that Israel was doing. It's really astounding to research this in today's world where you have the internet, but mostly what the internet has done, because most of the information is not online. That's one reason I'm writing the book, because then it will go online. And most people don't read books anymore. They mostly go to the internet. What it does is when I get an excellent book, and there are many strong books, I go to their bibliography and order the obscure books that they got their information from, which you can do because of Amazon. So I am discovering and being able to access books that, 15 years ago, there's no way I would have even heard of. And if I heard of them, I certainly would have no way of buying them or finding them. So I'm very excited about this project. I think it's going to be extremely eye-opening, especially for people that are being fooled, as you mentioned earlier, with the myth that Israel is an ally of the United States. As both of you know, it's the opposite of that. And as you mentioned, they tried to sink a U.S. Navy, killed 34 Americans, managed to get it covered up, have even gotten the top levels of the American Legion as part of the cover-up. Mm-hmm. So it's astounding what's been going on.
For someone who's just tuning in and stumbling upon us and doesn't even know that there's a problem with the information we're getting regarding Israel and Palestine and the relation to the U.S., what are some of the basic you've already named some, but some of the basic issues that we need? We have the $8 million a day of our taxpayer dollars going to Israel. That's one. But there's other issues that people might want to start off with.
That's right. Well, I think probably, as you say, one of the things I think that is important to start off with people is to make it clear that we are very connected to that conflict. It's not just our Jewish friends, or if we have any Arab or Muslim friends. It's really any American citizen, any American taxpayer is very connected to this, because as you mentioned, it's now actually 8.5. We use conservative numbers. It's over $8 million per day that goes to Israel. And this goes in a lump sum at the beginning of the fiscal year, unlike any other disbursement. So since we don't have that kind of money really, we borrow it. The government basically borrows it, gives it away to Israel immediately in a lump sum that's over $3 billion that's transferred to an interest-bearing account in the New York Federal Reserve Bank. That is an Israeli account. So we then have to pay interest on our money after it's gone because we borrowed it. So we keep paying interest on it. And Israel gets it. And of course, they don't spend it all that first day. So they actually derive additional money from us by getting interest on it. So that's one thing. In addition to that, there have been loan forgiveness programs. There are additional subsidies. There are trading perks that Israel gets that nobody else gets. Our Congress, on top of this over $3 billion that gets voted immediately, just a voice vote, everybody goes along because they do not want to be targeted by the very powerful Israel lobby. But then, throughout the year, Israel says, well, we want some more money. And so our Congress people go and say, well, let's see, how much can we give you? How about another $200 million? So they'll vote literally another $200 million for a weapon system for Israel to develop that, first of all, I don't actually like that kind of thing, but also it competes with American companies. So it takes money away and jobs away from Americans. It's another $200 million on top of the $3 billion they're already getting. And then on top of that, they've been selling what's called Israel bonds in the United States for, really, it's over 60 years now. They started in about 1951. Originally, they were being sold in Jewish portions of cities and synagogues. It was very much just an act of support for Israel because people knew the Israeli economy was very shaky. So, they didn't do it to think that they would make money from it. They'd buy this Israeli savings bond, then in about 12 years, they got their money back with a tiny bit more, since it's supposed to have a little bit of interest that pays on top of it. But really what happened is they were getting paid, it was a Ponzi scheme. So, this is a Ponzi scheme.
It was a what? Alison, it was say that again.
Sure. Basically a Ponzi scheme. One of those schemes where you promise you'll pay somebody money in 10 years and you keep selling things and you pay people back with the new money that's coming in. It's not money you really have. It's just this new money that you're promising you'll pay them back in 10 years. And it works fine until you run out of people gullible enough to buy them. And then it all comes crashing down because there's not the money to pay it. So Israel at first could pay these off because people kept buying these, so they could buy the old people off with the new people's money. But then, they got into so much debt and there was such devaluation of Israeli currency that they devalued their currency twice. Twice basically they threw out their currency and devalued it so much that people were being, quote, paid back, but with money that was worth,
half as much. Sure.
That's right, half as much, get even less than that. So, again, these were mostly people who were devoted to Israel, and I imagine they just rolled it over, hoping times would get better than getting paid back with sustaining such a major loss. But what they've been doing now in the last, another person's researching this and told me about it, so I've started to research it. Chuck Carlson is the real expert. What they've been doing now since about it looks like the 1990s, but it's greatly increased since about 2000. They now are marketing more and more of these Israel bonds to the general American public. And they're very careful to keep it within probably the letter of the law. But the way it is being pushed is that implying and suggesting to people that these are strong investments, that this is not just to support Israel, this is a good, safe way for you to make money. It's not. It's basically a junk bond. But that's the way they are trying to market it to the American public. And in fact, they are trying to market this to Americans to buy these instead of buying American bonds. American bonds do at least support our country and, support Americans, and, that's the reason I think a lot of people have bought them. That they're saying, oh, listen, Israel bonds will pay 3 times more than a U.S. savings bond. Specifically taking purchasers away from U.S. bonds to sell them Israel bonds. Now, maybe they'll pay 3 times more if they have enough people who keep buying them. But they are accruing so much debt. Last year they sold at least $1 billion worth. And despite the myths about Israel, and I actually believed this until just recently, they do not have a strong economy. They do not produce at high levels. Most of their wealth has come from Americans, from these very systems that are going on. So even though now they have a lower unemployment rate than we do, a better balance of payments with the rest of the world than we do. Certainly with us than we do. They export more to us than we export to them. So they look much better off at our expense. But in reality, this is something of a shell game. So quite likely these bonds that are just now being marketed to people who, I'm very fearful, are not going to get their money back. And they're doing it again through basically bribing our politicians. A governor or a treasurer of a state, this happened in Colorado and in Texas specifically, I've just looked into, are taken over, usually on a, all expense paid trip, often with their wife and other people too, wined and dined. They come back, and then the state purchases Israel bonds for the state, the state's portfolio. And then some of those bonds that they purchase are not necessarily the bad ones. They may purchase the short-term ones that are probably don't pay much interest, but are not risky. But then the Israel bonds salesmen use that to go out to the general public, and the general public says, oh, well, our treasurer, who, is clearly knowledgeable about this, bought Israel bonds, I'll buy them too. And that's how they're sort of, the hook that they're getting people on.
Mm-hmm. It seems pretty obvious that the Israelis, first of all, it's very obvious that, I don't know if you, saw the movie or read the book about the what was it called? The wagging the tail, the dog,
yes.
Wag the dog. Who? Yeah, wag the dog. All right. Mm-hmm. And this is clearly a case, as far as the American people, we the people in this country are being wagged. And we're being wagged by the tail in this case being Israel. And, I think that it's really important to understand that, it is, as you said, Alison, a shell game. It's not only a shell game financially speaking or economically, but in terms of the military aid, or so-called aid. I don't even like that word aid because it's beyond aid. The military hardware that Israel gets, and that's in the billions. Well, actually, it's in the trillions now, if you consider that it's been going on for approximately 6 years. 60. Did I say 6 years? 60 years. So we're really talking about trillions of dollars, not billions. It's absolutely ludicrous for any Americans. I don't care what their color or what their gender. It's absolutely, or their ethnic background. It's ludicrous for us to go on and allow ourselves to be pimped, used, and blood-sucked, and at the same time propagandize our Congress, virtually our entire Congress, as I said before, and the White House, from Barack Obama, Joe Biden on down, are controlled, and I repeat, are controlled by the powerful Israeli lobby. That is not democracy. I repeat, that is not democracy. That is a subversion of democracy. Having said that, I know you were going to say something, Phil. Go ahead, bro.
Well, thank you, Larry, and thank you, Alison. This is just some of the issues that we're talking about, and as you all were talking, I went to the website for the National Summit to reassess the U.S.-Israel special relationship, natsummit.org, and I clicked the topics button, and we have the backgrounder, history and current situation in the Middle East, how the, quote, special relationship affects U.S. standing in the region, the Israeli connection to U.S. wars and calls for military action in the Middle East, Israel's impact on U.S. security and the American economy, American casualties of this special relationship, impact on the political process, the Israel lobby and Congress, which Larry was just alluding to, the Israel lobby's influence on political parties, the Israel lobby and the news media. And boy, this looks like one heck of a conference coming up, and so much of what is and what we've been told are there's a gap, a wide gap in between what we've been told through our media, through the churches actually here in the U.S., and just the myth of poor little old Israel over there. We've got to look out for them, and the more you delve into it, with work like your organization has done and your personal visit back in 2001 where you were on the ground and took a look, it's quite the opposite. The national summit coming up, and I have a very deep concern, as do many, with what are often called wars for Israel, and the Israel's influence on our foreign policy. The more I find out, the more bothered by it I become, and that's one of my pet peeves out of these topics here. Alison, we did get a question from the chat room, and that question is how U.S. support for Israel influences U.S. foreign policy in general.
It really dominates U.S. foreign policy, especially any U.S. policies having to do with the Middle East, with North Africa, with quite a few other places further afield, are very dominated according to how they will affect Israel. In fact, the ambassador from the U.S. to Israel, Ambassador Shapiro, I can't think of his first name right now, made a speech a few years ago. It was published, there was a reference to it, I think, in the Jewish Telegraphic Agency, and then they had I think I either saw a transcript or I listened to the speech. Now I can't remember. But in that speech, which very fortunately they made public, usually they keep these things pretty hidden, he literally said that every U.S. policy is evaluated by how it will affect Israel. That's how they evaluate whether a U.S. policy will go forward or not. It's evaluated on how it will affect Israel. Now, what are some of the specifics of that? At the National Summit, we will be having some speakers on panels that specifically talk about the Israel connection to why we are in Iraq, why we fought the Iraq War, and why there is this major push in the government and in media against Iran. And again, both, as you both know, and I imagine many of your listeners know, but the general public does not know how central Israel has been to both of those issues. There's a book called The Transparent Cabal by Dr. Stephen Snagosky, who details that it was the neoconservatives in the Bush administration who pushed the war against Iraq because it was considered that would be beneficial to Israel. The neoconservatives had been writing about that many years before, in several cases in documents for the Israeli government. Douglas Feith is one of them. He was the deputy Undersecretary of Defense in the Pentagon. Before that, he was working for Benjamin Netanyahu in Israel and wrote him a position paper about what would be important strategic policies for Israel. He co-authored several papers of that sort with a number of other American neocons who were saying that to defend Israel, they needed to worry about three nations in particular. They were concerned because Israel has always known that it needed to maintain military hegemony, military dominance of the entire region, of the entire Middle East. So the way they've done that is two ways. One way is they get American weaponry, so that they will have a stronger military than all of the rest of them combined. They steal American technology and secrets, and with that they have built over 100 nuclear weapons. Now it could be up to 400. But they also attack any other country that looks like it is becoming prosperous and therefore could conceivably become a threat to Israel. Most recently, there were 3 nations that in these early reports that, as I recall, were written, they were saying that the 3 countries that Israel needed to be concerned about were Iraq, Iran, and Syria. Now, by coincidence, they got the U.S. to attack and devastate Iraq. Now, Iraq is no longer a first world country, so therefore no potential threat to Israel. Iran, they have been pushing and pushing and pushing for some sort of an attack on Iran by the United States. So far, we think we haven't done that, but actually we have, because our Congress keeps pushing through these economic sanctions against Iran to a level that really, from what I understand of international law, this would be considered an act of war.
Act of war, yes.
This kind of blockade that we're now doing against Iran. So quite a bit has happened there, even though we haven't had an outright military attack on them. Israel has.
Well, Alison, let me interject there. The United States has not done a blatant outright attack on Iran, but in fact, the United States has launched cyber attacks against Iran, and I'm talking in technological terms, i.e. the internet, etc. And the United States, Israel, and Britain have all launched covert, on-the-ground attacks against Iran. But of course, all of those things are covert. Just wanted to interject that. Sorry. Go on, Alison.
No, that's a very good point. And Israel has assassinated a number of Iranians. You know, young scientists have been killed.
Yes.
By Israeli forces. So, you know, a lot has gone on against Iran. Now, remember, Iran has done nothing against us. You know, they've done even less against us than Iraq and Afghanistan. Neither of them had done anything against the U.S. either. But Iran, there's not even anything that they have done against the United States whatsoever or against Israel whatsoever. And yet here there's this big, you know, drum roll for us to attack Iran. And, you know, so that, as we know, is going on. And then third, Syria. You know, Syria is in a tragic condition now with just, you know, horrible violence, destruction. And, you know, clearly both sides are committing atrocities, as happens in warfare. That's why the world should be so slow to go to wars. And there's clearly Israeli tentacles in that one. You know, clearly there's Israeli involvement in what we're calling the rebels. There's American CIA involvement. There's Saudi Arabia involvement there as well. So that's another divide and conquer. So now, you know, there were 3 countries that were considered a threat to Israel, and these are public record documents. They had them on their websites. They closed the websites down, but enough other people saved them that it's, what I'm saying is not unknown. This is, you know, this is not something I've discovered. It's been out there. It's just that our media rarely, if ever, talk about them. But at the summits, we will have some of the experts who know all of that information much better than I do because they've just written books on it.
Alison, are you going to be able, you've got me really excited about this summit. Is there any way that parts of it or all of it are going to be on the internet, or how are you going to handle that? How's that going to be handled?
Unfortunately, we're not going to be able to live stream it, which I would have loved to do. but apparently the technology is not there. We're having it at the National Press Club. So,
right.
I'm just told they don't have the bandwidth to allow programs to do that. Now there's a hope that it will, this is maybe a dream, but it's possible that CSpan would film it. In fact, especially if enough people, maybe that would make a difference. I really don't know how CSpan works, but if a lot of people really told CSpan that they were very interested in these speakers and would like to watch it, maybe that would help. I don't know how CSpan decides, but there is that possibility. And we ourselves are professionally videotaping it. So we will afterwards put it up online. We'll put the whole conference online. We'll probably also try to make shorter videos that, clips of individual speakers that we'll put on YouTube. So we will do our best once it's happened for anybody that was not in that room. And of course, most people cannot be there. We'll try to have it up completely so that other people will also be able to see and hear for themselves what went on.
Great. That's fantastic, because you really got me excited about this, especially once Phil started talking about the actual topics that are going to be covered there. Now, that's what we need to get out there. Those topics, very specifically, Americans, we in this country, really need to know. So that's why I'm excited. Forgive my excitement.
Sure. And I don't know if you can hear, my little grandson has just come in the room. There he is. His mother just took him back out of the room. It's
15 seconds of fame, right? We cannot be silent.
Absolutely not.
So silence is not really what you would connect with him.
Yeah, silence is not his thing. Good.
Only when he's asleep. But
go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Just going to mention, we're also the speakers at the summit. It's not only that these topics that are so rarely discussed, they are taboo. People know that you don't talk about that if you're ambitious. However, we have excellent people that are quite willing to talk about them openly and publicly and have written articles about them with very extremely knowledgeable people. A number of former CIA analysts, a number of, Phil Giraldi, Michael Scheuer, Ray McGovern, Paul Pillar, James David, military, CIA, congressional, FBI, high-ranking gentlemen and some ladies, I'm going to be speaking to, are going to be speaking at this summit. These are the people that are willing to do this. They're not, some low-level disgruntled person that may or may not be telling the truth. These are people with strong resumes and strong information, and they're going to be giving that information. So.
Great.
Well, I need to interject here. We do have a caller in the queue.
Alison, I am very excited about this summit too. I had no idea that's what the show was going to be about when I heard that Phil was having you on. I seem to recall that there was some criticism coming out about Netanyahu trying to influence the presidential election in 2012, and about the same time. Well, I mean, you heard that from politically connected people, but at the same time, I seem to recall reading several references of military and intelligence officials speaking off the record, saying that they no longer regarded Israel as our best ally. They were more of a problem than an ally. Now, I never saw any follow-up to that, which leads me to believe I must have been imagining the whole thing. But then I see that Obama was willing to piss off Israel and Saudi Arabia over Syria and then reaching out to Iran, and I'm left with the question, do you think that there's really a faction within the U.S. Government that's actively trying to change that policy right in front of everybody without being obvious about it?
That's a very good question. To a degree, I wish there were more of one. When I, first got curious about this back 12 or 13 years ago, I thought, well, certainly people are opposing this. People more powerful than I must be worried about. And unfortunately, it was not there. There were people more powerful than I am that were worried about it, but not that I could see were really doing much about it in any kind of concerted way. So I don't feel there's this strong nucleus of activity of that sort that I had hoped might be going on. But as you've noticed, there are people at high levels of the government, up to the president, who have done some things in the last very few years that were going in the right direction. That, like you, I sort of thought, because Obama is, I feel he's in chains. His first speech was to AIPAC. Any of us that have been following this all along knew he would be doing what AIPAC wanted. This is, what your Faustian contract. When they make you president is then you have to do on certain things what they tell you to do or within those prescribed limits. But it did seem that he was sort of pushing the limits of what he could do in ways that were sort of exciting, even though they were small. You would think that the president had more power than that. But
that's what Kennedy thought.
They don't, there's only so much power there. But it has seemed that Obama has tried to do within his chains that he's certainly pushing against them as hard as he can. And then some of these other, high figures, even Petraeus, said at one point that this was placing U.S. troops at risk because of what Netanyahu was doing. But then he sort of quickly backed off and sort of apologized. And when Obama appointed Chuck Hagel to be the Secretary of Defense, that was in some ways very exciting because Hagel, within the paradigm we're working in, has been quite good on Israel-Palestine in terms of being surprisingly honest and intelligent in the things he said about that. But then, of course, the lobby attacked him so much that he had to grovel and promise how devoted he is to Israel. And now that he's in office, I don't really see much positive coming from him. So, that some people thought that was a real triumph because the lobby had tried to torpedo his nomination, but he got in there anyway. But now he's in there, they seem to have crippled his actions.
Yes.
So I think it's a little mix. I think there are people in the Pentagon, there have always been people actually in the Pentagon and the State Department pushing against this, but I think there are more people at higher levels doing more of it and some of it more publicly than before. Maybe I'm trying to be optimistic here, but it's interesting. I think you picked up on that, and I've been noticing some of those things too.
We have to be optimistic, Alison, otherwise our work doesn't mean anything, does it? I mean, we're the ones that have to make the change that will force him to do the right thing. He said it himself.
That's right. And I think, some people will be very cynical and say, oh, well, they'll talk about the power that's opposing us on all these different levels. And to me, prophecies are often self-fulfilling. So if you, sort of take the cop out and prophesize, well, they'll win anyway, they're so powerful, then of course they will. And I'd rather, say that no, they won't. We will win ultimately. And I hope that will be a self-fulfilling prophecy. So.
Well, thanks for your work and thanks for your answer.
Thank you.
Is that Rick in Oregon?
Yes, it is. I'm going to send Alison an email and ask her to be on my show too.
Wonderful. Thanks for calling in, Rick.
You bet. Take care, guys. Bye, Alison.
Okay.
Thanks.
Goodbye.
We also have another question here coming through the chat. Please ask Alison about the Israeli attacks on the flotillas bringing food and medicine to the Palestinians. And I would like to make a quick comment before you answer that, Alison. What some people still don't know is that an American citizen was shot in the head and murdered by Israeli troops who was on one of those rescue boats, the food and medicine boats, and months later, the Prime Minister of Israel, Netanyahu, came to the U.S. Congress and had the entire U.S. Congress in the audience giving 29, no less than 29 standing ovations. Democrats, Republicans, the power of this one state that still to this day is not a registered foreign agent.
Which I know that they,
right, and they were trying to do that. I believe Rick, the caller just before, mentioned Kennedy, John F. Kennedy. At that time, that was the last you really heard of the U.S. calling for Israel to be registered as a foreign agent with the United States. But I've diverted from the question, and we got to get back to the question.
Before you go on to that question, I want to make a comment, if you don't mind, on the point, the previous question, and I need to say this. I need to say this because I have enormous respect for those people who, for so many decades, have tried to expose the Israeli Zionists and what's going on. And Zionists are not just Israelis. They're not just Jews. Zionists can be anyone. You don't have to be Jewish to be Zionists. And in fact, many Jews are not Zionists. Let me be very clear about that. But, you know, as far as Barack Obama is concerned, I personally have read Obama's speeches before ever Obama was elected and subsequently installed in the quote-unquote White House. And he made it crystal clear to AIPAC whose side he was on. And it wasn't the side of the everyday, ordinary black, white, brown, red, and yellow people. And it wasn't the side, including Palestinians. It was not on the side of Palestinians. So I am, frankly, I'm not an optimist. I'm a cynical optimist. In other words, I hope for the best, but I expect and try to prepare for the absolute worst so as to deflect the worst. In other words, if I want to change reality, I first have to face reality. So I call that being a cynical optimist, okay? So when it comes to Barack Obama, Joe Biden, and over 90% of the rest of those scoundrels, I face the reality of what they are because I want to change it. So I just had to make that statement. Anyway, go ahead, Bill.
Thanks, Larry. Well, let's just turn it over to Alison. The Israeli attacks on the flotillas and bringing food and medicine to the Palestinians, and Larry's comments.
Sure. Well, just in terms of, I like that sort of like, what was it you said, cynical optimist. I guess maybe that I am, I think I'm maybe the skeptical optimist. Ultimately optimistic, but I'm very skeptical. When somebody says something, I want to know, well, where, how do you know that's true? Where's the information from? Do you have the evidence? Both on statements that I find appealing. I still want to know, well, is that accurate? So I think I'm quite skeptical too. And certainly with Obama, he was, there was an article in the Chicago Jewish newspaper back in 2008 that was entitled Obama and the Jews. I would never write a title like that, but in various Jewish newspapers that type of title is quite common. And this tells, quite clearly, it details who funded him, who sort of plucked him out of obscurity and made him a star. So I'm not, I think fairly aware of, some of the background to how he got to be president, and it's not that certainly doesn't make us optimistic, but, I still feel that he sold his soul to a degree, but there's part of it still there, and personally I think he's an intelligent man, and I like to think that there's a core of decency that will maybe come out more than it has so far, to put it mildly. But anyway, getting back to the flotilla, these were boats that were started by actually some friends of mine had this idea quite a few years ago. It was two people especially, Greta Berlin and Paul LaRuti, two activists both of whom happen to be from California. At least that's where they're living now. That's not really where they're from. And they had really this amazing dream that they were going to raise the money and sail a boat to Gaza and take supplies and humanitarian aid to Gaza, that this would be done. People had been trying to get overland there, and of course it's been basically a concentration camp, very difficult, often impossible to get into. So they thought, we'll just sail there. And, these are people without lots of money, like most of us. They had this dream, and they talked to me early on, and I was very supportive and tried to help a bit here and there. And it took quite a while. Several years. They finally got enough money to buy sort of a leaky boat that could sail the Mediterranean. I think it's 12 hours or 18 hours. Major sail I've been on sailboats, and I know you need to have your boat working properly when you do something like that, or it will be fatal. So they got the money together, they pulled it together. Nobody knew, I was at some of these early meetings, whether Israeli forces would come and just kill them all. That was, seemed one of the scenarios that might happen. Fortunately, it didn't happen on that one. They made it there, and it was just enormously exciting. I was not on the voyage. One of my daughters, it kept getting postponed, and ended up being at the same time when one of my children was getting married. So I didn't go on that. I went to the wedding, of course. But it was very exciting. So then they managed to do a few more where they'd get a boat and scrape up the money and sail it to Gaza. It was frightening. I think on that first time the Israeli forces came but let them get through, which makes more sense. I really don't know why Israeli forces don't just let them go through. What matter if they bring a few medicines and crayons and, food are the types of things they were bringing. The first time they let them go through, then I guess they decided that they just could, had to prove that they controlled Gaza and nobody could go to Gaza if they didn't allow them in, even though they claim that Gaza is free. Finally, in one of the most recent situations where many boats of people from all over the world raising money to take these boats to sail in and take humanitarian aid to Gaza, Israeli forces stopped them, boarded them, and in the case of the Mavi Marmara, this was a boat that happened to be from Turkey. There was another boat from the U.S., boats from other European countries. They boarded that boat. Some of the people there tried to, these were armed commandos boarding the boat at sea. Yes. Some people tried to, fight back, and the commandos just killed them. It was, this one young man, he was 19 years old, had American citizenship as well as Turkish citizenship. The autopsy afterwards showed, as I recall, 5 bullets in him, several to the head from close range. And he was not the only body like that. Many of them, it turned out, were shot at close range with multiple bullets. This was done to an American citizen, and yet, as you say, the American government did not stand up for him. Just as these, our Navy sailors that were on the USS Liberty, 34 of them killed, 174 of them at least injured. They tried to sink the entire ship. The U.S. government has not stood up for them. The media has not stood up for them. Rachel Corrie, who was 23 years old, bulldozed to death, killed her. The government did not stand up for her. Brian Avery, I think he was about 25 years old when they shot him in the face. Nobody stood up for him. Tristan Anderson, 36 years old. They shot him in the head with a tear gas canister. Now he's blind in one eye, brain damaged, in a wheelchair. Israel commits atrocities not only against Palestinians and Lebanese and Egyptians and other people in that region, they do it to Americans. And yet our government keeps sending them more money. And this is, as you, I think you've both mentioned, this is both parties. It's not, oh, those bad Republicans or, oh, those bad Democrats. It's both of them doing really almost exactly the same thing. A little bit different here and there. They attack each other. They both try to claim they're more pro-Israel than the other one. And this has been going on, as we've said, it was going on with Truman and Dewey already. And it's been going on ever since.
Yes, and it gets back to if Americans knew. I know the first time I found out about the USS Liberty, Allison, I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe it that a foreign government could attack a U.S. ship like it did and murder 34 of its sailors and Marines and wounded 171 others, and nothing happened, And Phil,
mm-hmm. and this was not a battleship, all right? The USS Liberty was not a battleship. It was not a cruiser, okay? Right. It was not a heavy or light cruiser. It was nothing more than a reconnaissance ship. That's all it was, a reconnaissance ship.
Right.
The U.S. Navy.
That's
all right,
right.
but go ahead. I just put that in.
Yeah, but and I understand, and there's please, one of the speakers actually is going to be Ernie Gallo of the USS Liberty Veterans Association, one of the speakers at the event at the National Press Club on March 7, 2014, this national summit to reassess the U.S.-Israel special relationship. And please, look into this, the USS Liberty. And so I had found out about that, and when I learned of the aid boats getting attacked, as you just detailed, Allison, and that an actual U.S. citizen was assassinated point blank, on the ship, and nothing happened. It wasn't mainstream news, it wasn't corporate news. We've got to be the news ourselves, and you're doing it. The more we're into this show tonight, the more excited and important I feel this summit that you're all putting on March 7th it is. And as you and Larry were talking, I've been online on the CSpan website. To perhaps people that are working on the summit have already been there, but you can contact CSpan to get the event covered.
So you're talking to the audience now, right? You're telling the audience they can
exactly.
Do that. Okay.
And thanks, Larry. And Allison may already on there is a process that the people that are putting on the event have to go through themselves, the sponsoring organizations. But you can call CSpan at 202-737-3220. Again, call CSpan at 202-737-3220 and call them and tell them you want them to cover this event, this national summit to reassess the U.S.-Israel special relationship, Friday, March 7th, 2014. And you can direct them to the website, natsummit.org. And
where's it being held? Where's it being held?
National Press Club in Washington, D.C. Yes.
That's important to say that.
Thank you. Yes. So, our listeners can do that. Go ahead.
I was just going to, I think, thank you so much. That would be truly excellent. And I would encourage listeners, be very friendly and polite, because CSpan has sometimes covered things. This is potentially a good organization. They actually covered one of my, I gave a speech about 10 years ago in Washington, D.C. at a small, very, very small think tank about the USS Liberty. And they filmed it and put it on C-SPAN. It was the only time I've ever had that happen. Well, one other time I was briefly on C-SPAN. But, so sometimes it's rare, but sometimes they do this. So potentially the person listening to you will be very receptive. Partly what will go on with them is it's Washington, D.C. There'll be a lot of things going on that day. Competing for their camera, what should we film? What's the big news of the day? And I'm hoping that they will see, and I actually do feel the news judgment would lead them to see that the summit would be the big news of the day, because this is unprecedented. To have this gathering of people talking on that subject, is an unprecedented historic event. So there is some hope that they will cover it. But the more they hear about it, the more they realize, wait, this seems to be pretty significant. People around the country have heard about it. Wow, this seems to be a big event. We'll just hope that, I think that it will truly be newsworthy of news coverage. Not just because I'm putting it on, but because we have gotten an amazing array of top-level speakers. Just one or two of these speakers would often make it into C-SPAN. And
absolutely. Alison, let me just interject and say that to our listeners, please do this. Phil gave the number to contact C-SPAN. All right, contact C-SPAN and say quite clearly that it is important that Americans see the whole picture, the total picture. Okay, and I think that this is what a quote unquote democracy is supposed to be all about. So there is always hope, but I always add another word in front of the word hope. Hope has to be actualized. In other words, if we hope, then we have to do something to demonstrate our hope. As the biblical expression goes, in the book of James, I believe it is, that faith without works is dead. So if we have hope, let's actualize our hope. Let's call in. Let's, as you said, Alison, yes, let's be polite about it, but let's be clear about it, that we really, really desire C-SPAN to cover this event at the National Press Club in Washington, D.C.
Okay. Thank you, Larry. And I forwarded the information to Alison's email.
I think that the first step is there are not yet enough of us to have sufficient impact. So the first step isn't as exciting as a big march or something, because it would not be a big march. It would be a small march. And that won't have an impact. So the first step, I think, is putting on events in your community where you have a speaker or a documentary showing or an event in the library. Libraries are often good because it's a very neutral kind of place where people go to learn and to read and to become aware of things. It could be in a church. It could be at a synagogue. I've never had one there, but maybe they have been there. Certainly there are many Jewish groups that are very good on this issue, trying to do that. So I think putting on campuses, I've spoken in retirement homes. I think the first thing is to inform the people around you of what's going on. We on our website, If Americans Knew, we have a section called Materials. It's right on the top, way at the top in sort of gray letters, are about 5 menu items. One of them says Materials. And if you click on that from us, we will send you brochures, fact sheets, booklets that you can give to other people to learn about these things. So I think that's one of the first things. And also, of course, when a candidate comes to your location asking you to vote for them, it's very important for lots of people to stand up and say, I'm very concerned about U.S. policies of unconditional support for Israel that are preventing peace and just causing the violence to continue. I want to see different policies, and when candidates, if they start to hear from enough people saying they want different policies, then those candidates want to get elected. The campaign money they get is just to get elected. At times, grassroots campaigns overcome the funding that comes in from donors. So if they see, wait, this audience, these people that I need to vote for me, want me to end aid to Israel, which is what I think they should do personally. If they start hearing that from enough people, then they might even say that. And in fact, from what I've heard in Congress, is over half of Congress probably already knows that that's what they should do. They might even like it if their constituents would start demanding that of them, because then they might finally be able to disregard AIPAC, thumb their nose at AIPAC. Nobody likes being a puppet. They could maybe finally cut those strings because they would understand that the voters would support them in taking the best stand on that issue. So I think informing other people and going to, not just in backroom meetings with candidates and with your local congressman, that does something. I've had those, but basically it does very little. If publicly start being confronted with people saying that people want a different stand, that will start to make an impact when there are enough of us doing that.
Very good. And we have another question coming through the chat. Are Code Pink and JVP involved in the conference? I didn't see them listed. JVP, is that Jewish?
Yes, that's
Voices?
Jewish
Go ahead.
Voice. Yes, JVP.
Voices for Peace.
Jewish Voice for Peace. They're not specifically involved. There are, let me think. There are 4 organizations that are putting it on. It's If Americans Knew, Council for the National Interest, the Washington Report on Middle East Affairs, an excellent magazine that's been publishing for 20 years, really the top magazine on the region, and the Institute for Research Middle Eastern Policies, another excellent organization that's published about 7 or 8 books on this issue. So the 4 of us are the sponsoring organizations. We have diverse speakers. I'm trying to remember if any of them, Code Pink is very much an activist organization.
Right.
So for the summit, what we were doing is specifically focusing on the U.S. connection to this. This isn't another conference I would love to have at some point would be specifically telling people about the region. But what we felt was necessary, fortunately there are events like that. They're not they're not publicized by the mainstream media, but they do occur. What we had not seen going on was an event that would really discuss the U.S. connection to it, the amount of money, how it impacts Americans. Many Americans are very busy, and if they think this is some foreign, complicated issue, they just, in many cases, don't feel they have the time to really focus on it. But if they understand, as in this case, that this is an interest that impacts them an issue that impacts them directly, that's very important to their lives, then there's much more likelihood that they will pay attention and learn what's going on. So because of that, JVP and Code Pink are very much focused on the region and very much activist type of individuals. And in this, our speakers are people that have written books, that have high-level analytical positions, have served in Congress. Those are the type of speakers that we were bringing together for this particular event.
And boy, when you go to the site, natsummit.org, and look at the lineup of speakers, many of these speakers have been repeated guests on C-SPAN, different programs of C-SPAN. And I noticed Ray McGovern, former CIA officer, he actually hosted in 2006 a conference on 9/11 and Intellectuals Speak Out, and that was televised not once but twice on C-SPAN, dealing with the 9/11 issue, Alison. So I think there's a chance here if people can make some noise about this and demonstrate the quality of speakers that are participating in this summit.
Right.
I think you got a real good chance at making a case for C-SPAN covering it.
That's right. And as you know, McGovern did the daily briefings for the first President Bush when he was the CIA director. He did the daily briefings for him. So
Exactly.
We're talking about top level people that are going to be talking at this summit in ways that you don't hear very often in Washington D.C. in public. You hear them privately all the time, but this is going to be where people hear publicly about how this impacts Americans.
Are there any other things that we should know about or that you'd like to share with us before we close things out tonight?
Let me see. Thanks so much. This has been an excellent show. I've really enjoyed. Too bad we aren't in the same room. It would be wonderful to have a even more extensive conversation. So I think we've covered so much of it. I'm trying to think if after this show, all three of us will probably think of things we should have mentioned. But we've covered quite a bit. I'm glad we did the Liberty. We've talked about Palestine itself a bit. We've talked about the neoconservatives and Iran, which is so significant. I think maybe the final thing is how it's impacting our country after 9/11, how we're closing down civil liberties because we think we're under attack, when really all we need to do is change our policies. We want to be safe. We all want to be safe, and the way to do that is to change our policies. I guess that's maybe the final note.
I agree. And what you said about working in our own communities, I'm with the Veterans for Peace chapter here in Central Florida, and when we found out about the USS Liberty, we immediately began screening the film, DVDs showing public screenings of the Dead in the Water and the other one, Attack on the USS Liberty films. And we put out flyers, and we've been doing that for years now, and we talk about it. There's another film by Italian filmmaker Massimo Mazzucco entitled The New American Century, which details quite well the whole cabal there of neoconservatives, the project for the New American Century, and their ties to Israel, the Israeli dual citizens in the highest levels of our government, and who were in the highest levels of our government the day of the 9/11 attacks, and used those attacks as justification to carry out the wars they'd been advocating for years. So these are things we can do at the local level. You just show the films locally, put out flyers, show them at the public library or your college, school, whatever group, your church group, whatever. So we can do these things. Larry, did you have any closing comments or thoughts before we say goodnight?
Well, first I want to thank our audience, our listening audience. I want to thank very, very much, Alison. Thank you so much, Alison Weir. And, of course, Dave Corso, our intrepid producer. I want to say that when we say neoconservatives, let's understand that there are neoconservatives in both the Democrat and Republican parties. Let's be clear about that. I think people sometimes get confused. They think, oh, neoconservative means Republican. Well, it doesn't have to be Republican. It can also be Democrat. In fact, it is also Democrat. It's both. So what we need to do is really approach both parties, and I say both tongue-in-cheek because I see them as basically one party, and to let them know that we will simply not tolerate our democracy being further subverted, because that's what's happened. Our democracy has been subverted. And I want to close by quoting the words of the late, great Margaret Mead when she said, "Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful people can make a difference. In fact, it is the only thing that ever has," unquote.
I cannot be silent.
Nobody can do everything, but everybody can do something. Everyone must play a part. Everyone got to go to work. Work for peace. Spirit say work.
I cannot be silent.